There's something that happened one time in Guatemala which really brought this home to me again, the need to become more missionary mentality. It happened, Guatemala at that time when I first got there was a very violent country, many deaths, summarily executed and so forth and thrown along the roadsides. And I remember one Sunday morning, about early in the morning, they came and told us that near our church, in the little lake near our church, 3 bodies were found. And there were 3 young men whose hands were tied behind their back, and they had been summarily shot and then dumped in the lake. And it really upset me, of course. And by this time, after so many deaths, I was really up to here with all this violence and death. And I said to the seminarians, today I think I have to talk about this in the Mass. I can't be silent. I said, Father, you don't want to do that. Don't say anything. Well, I wasn't happy with that answer. And when it came time for the homily, I talked about the spiral of violence. Just violence and more violence led to more violence. And during the homily, I thought, what's going on here? I felt a dynamic was different than normally, and I wasn't having eye contact. Almost everybody was with their heads down. I thought, Mass ended, and at the end of Mass, we would always sing, the Latin Americans, if there are 10 verses of a song, they will sing all 10 verses, and no one will move before that 10th verse is sung. So then I would always go back of the church, and meet and greet everybody as they left the church. That was what I always did. That day, we began our closing hymn, and, every church has some little lady that sort of holds up the church. She's like the pillar of that church in that area, And in that particular time, there was Doña Chagua. Doña Chagua, a great little lady. I was still on the altar, and she came up to the altar. She come up. I'm looking at her. She takes me by the arm and leads me into the sacristy. And she said, Father Pepe, we just don't talk about those things in Chile or in Guatemala. That's just the way life is here. Wow, talk about a symbolic action. She led me into the sacristy. That's where I should stay. And the problems of the world are out there. That night I prayed, oh God, may I never become insensitive to the suffering of the poor and never become deaf or close my eyes to that. I don't blame her. They go through so much in Guatemala. I guess it's their way of coping with all that constant violence. But we can't do that. We need to hear that cry and respond to it. It's a call to mission. And that's why I brought that up, because I think we need to realize that we are called to be missionaries. The cry of the blood, of the blood that is shed today, Abel's blood, which St. John Paul II in Evangelium Vitae in 1995 said, that the cry of Abel's blood continues to shout from the earth in so many different forms in our life. Whether it's the loneliness of some people, whether it's the exclusion of others, whether it's the rejection of poverty, whether because of their theological viewpoints or their sexual orientation. There's so many ways that we have to exclude people and to push them out. There's a cry there, a cry for inclusion. I cry to be included, to be recognized, to be valued as a person. There's a cry to be recognized, the human dignity. Doesn't Pope Francis again give us a wonderful example of this in his ministry? You all recall that day when he took to his heart and he pressed to himself the Benicio, the man deformed with all kinds of tumors on his face and body. I'm sure you've seen that picture. That day, Benicio explained in an interview in Panorama magazine, an Italian magazine later on, he said, the Holy Father that day, he wasn't afraid of me. he took me to himself. He just pressed me to his chest. He held me there, and then he kissed my face. He said, it all lasted about 1 minute. He never said one word, but I felt like I was in paradise. I felt like I was in paradise. To be a precious blood person, marked by the blood of Christ, we are called to be missionaries sent forth to help people discover their preciousness. There are many people, many of us maybe sitting here, we don't feel precious maybe. Maybe because, I don't know, we've been conditioned to think we aren't precious, or we've committed maybe a sin or a fault. We think, well, maybe God doesn't love me anymore, or I'll never be able to merit God's love. Or the world tells us, society says, you know, you are somebody, you are precious if you have a big bank account, if you're educated, if you're good looking, if you're young, if you're athletic. We have a whole list of things that society says give us worth and value. And if we begin to believe what Bob Schreiter says, those lies, if we begin to believe that, then when we get old and we're not so pretty anymore or so handsome and we're not so built and a good figure and our bank accounts shrivel up or we lose them in the stock market, then what happens to us? Where is our dignity? If we put our stock in that, it's wrongly placed. We've been living a lie. Jesus comes to teach us the truth about ourselves, that we are precious, made in the image and likeness of God, redeemed not by gold or silver, something even more precious, by the precious blood of Jesus. We are precious. And I think one of the basic messages of precious blood spirituality is to get out there in our families, in our workplaces, in our schools, wherever we are. Our missionary feet take us. Here in this country, we don't have to go outside the country. We don't even have to go outside sometimes of our family. There are people there who need to hear that message.